Comfort. We all like being comfortable. We like being cozy. It's why we don't like getting out of bed in the morning. It's why we like binging shows on Netflix. And it's why I wear the same gray t-shirt in every video and sit on the couch now. It's comfortable. But what could be more comfy than a nice, relaxing video game? Now, gaming is a massive industry, and the reasons we have for playing a game have expanded significantly. You can play a game to hone skills, pass the time, or just hang out with friends. For example, maybe you picked up Smash Bros. Just to full stock your friend Brandon and prove you were the best Kirby main in your entire 9th grade classroom. Maybe you started playing League of Legends because you saw Arcane one time and thought it looked cool, and then it turned into an 8-hour-a-day commitment that's closer to an addiction, and you don't know who you'd be without it. Grinding ranks just to prove to yourself that you can be good at something. Staring into the abyss of solo queue so long that the abyss has started to stare back. No, Dad, I'm not a failure. I'm almost Gold 3 now and I'm applying to Team Liquid this year. Or something like that. I've never actually played the game. But whether you consider yourself a capital G gamer or you've only ever played a couple games in your life, you probably have a comfort game. A game that you can unwind with and play to relax after a long day, and a game that you've probably put hundreds of hours into instead of picking up something new. Comfort games are some of the most popular types of games out there. We as consumers seek them out all the time. Most people, myself included, are always looking for a new one to get lost in. And most people, like myself, fail to find anything new and just go back to playing Minecraft for the 900th time. So let's talk about comfort games. What makes a good one, and what makes a comfort game in the first place? How can we define this weird genre? Also, I'll give you a little spoiler for later, I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us 2 and what happens when games aren't comfortable, so stay tuned for that. Or don't, you've really got all the power here. You could click off the video right now if you wanted to. So what is a comfort game? What are we talking about when we say that? Because calling a game comfortable can be a very vague way to describe it. It can often get overused like a lot of other video game buzzwords. Except unlike a game that makes you feel like Batman or feels meaty, I think there are actual factors that can go into making a game comfortable. And to help me understand what those factors are, I made a post asking you what your favorite comfort games are, and what a comfort game means to you. Your answers were very insightful and helped a lot, and I'm not just saying that because I like you. I can't fucking wink. So I'll be using some of the games you commented for examples as we go to try and help me break down this strange type of game. Now, the biggest and most encompassing factor to a comfort game is a sense of familiarity. Being comfortable and being familiar with the game kinda go hand in hand. But familiarity is also a pretty big topic, so let's split that up even further, starting with the gameplay. For a game to have familiar gameplay, it has to be both easy to pick up and easy to replay. If you're able to just pick up a game and get it, then that game is much easier to come back to. On the flip side, if you pick up a game after not playing for a couple months and you basically have to restart because you forget how every mechanic worked, then that game is much less likely to be a comfort game, which is why a lot of the most popular comfort games are ones like Stardew Valley or Minecraft. You can just boot up those games and immediately start having a good time because there's no roadblocks to the enjoyment. You can't even really lose either game at all. Like, I don't know what could possibly be a failure state in Stardew Valley. You didn't get the depressed alcoholic to go on a date with you in time for the big festival? Try again next year. It's not a big deal. And in the same vein, games like those are infinitely replayable because there is an incredible amount of content that you can do. Even if you're bored, you can just start a new game from scratch and go a different route. Go after the purple-haired girl who eats rocks instead. Everyone in this town is bisexual and will marry you if you buy them enough stuff. Looking at people's answers like Pikmin or Katamari Damacy show this off even more clearly. Those games are so quick to learn, you could probably pick up all the mechanics just by watching someone else play for a couple minutes. Oh, I've just got to roll stuff up into a big ball. That's it, I guess. And from what I've said, you might think that in order for a game to become comfortable, it has to be easy or forgiving, like Stardew Valley. But that's why I want to emphasize that it's not tied to difficulty or inherent replay value, but familiarity, because a game can actually be incredibly difficult or obtuse and still be your comfort game. I mean, the most popular comfort game that people commented when I asked was FromSoft games, which are notoriously difficult and punishing. Many people hate these games on the basis of them being too hard to get into, and yet surprisingly, many people find comfort in them. Why is that? Well, it certainly isn't because my biggest video is still a critique of Elden Ring and I owe almost all my success to that game. A bias towards FromSoft games in my audience? Now that can't be it. I think the biggest reason why many people find these games comfortable is that while they are very difficult to start out, you can learn their patterns very quickly. If you stick with a game like Dark Souls, you basically need to become familiar in order to progress. The game physically won't let you proceed until you understand its mechanics well enough to do so. And so the people who beat FromSoft games are going to be very comfortable going back and beating them again. Because once you kill a boss once or clear a dungeon for the first time, the second time is going to be much easier because you already know how to do it. It's much more familiar to you. Bloodborne is personally one of my favorite games of all time because of this, and a huge comfort game that I go back and replay all the time because it's just second nature to me. In the same vein, a lot of people's comfort games are RTS or strategy games, which are also very complex and hard to get into. I personally never clicked with those because they look more complicated than my own taxes, but to many people, they're what's familiar. And to further expand on familiarity, along with a game having lots of content or being easy to get into, you've also got the glue that holds it all together, which is how the game actually feels to play. Because comfort games tend to have something that a lot of other games don't. The best way I could describe it is inherently satisfying gameplay. Which might seem a bit stupid. Obviously, every game tries to have satisfying gameplay. That's like the first lesson of game design, but let me explain. The comment that actually inspired this video was surprisingly one on my horror games video, which you can watch right here, that asked about walking in video games. Specifically in games like Death Stranding or Shadow of the Colossus, where a lot of the game is just walking around this giant empty map. And that comment in those games got me to thinking as to why they're enjoyable. Because walking in a lot of games is very tedious. It's the part that you skip with fast travel to try and get to the good bits. But in both these games, as well as many others that have a large portion of walking, like Skyrim or The Witcher 3, the reason they feel different is because walking around and exploring the map feels satisfying. There's music or ambiance playing, the scenery is gorgeous, and in the case of Death Stranding, there's even walking mechanics to try and keep you engaged. These games have managed to take the typically tedious gameplay and turn it into something low effort and relaxing. In the same way that, again, going back to Minecraft, some of my favorite parts of that game are maintaining a farm or strip mining or breeding animals. That, by all means, should be the boring part, and yet I just love spending hours mining out a cave while watching a YouTube video or listening to music. More so than even the engaging gameplay moments like exploring the Nether or fighting bosses. Many times you will hear comfort games referred to as a game where you just turn your brain off. And what I take that to mean is that where lots of games can have boring segments that you just want to skip past, a comfort game can have you feeling some satisfaction in every aspect of gameplay, even those more mundane tasks. Sure, the main game might have some more skillful or engaging gameplay involved, but those long stretches in between are often the reason you go back and play. Whether it's swinging around in Spider-Man or walking in Death Stranding or grinding in World of Warcraft, there's just something about that low-effort gameplay that the game can make relaxing. Even just talking about Spider-Man, for instance, the web swinging in that game is a perfect example, because it has enough depth that you can pull off tricks to look cool or go faster, but you don't need to actually think about what you're doing at all. So you can devote just enough attention to get from A to B, but not enough that it feels like you're putting any effort in, which is a surprisingly fine line to walk, because you can look at a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake, and there is just a lot of walking in that game. Like, I don't know why this genetically enhanced Super Twink can jump 50 feet in the air and wield a sword bigger than his own body, and then just decides to walk slower than my grandmother. Don't get me wrong, the rest of the game is fantastic, but it's because those slower parts didn't grab my attention that I wouldn't consider it a comfort game of mine. A lot of it feels really tedious, and a true comfort game, to me at least, is one where even those slower parts can be somewhat enjoyable. All of the gameplay can be inherently satisfying. And on the other side of this, you have the games that have no mundane moments to speak of. Games that, instead of making the downtime engaging, just cut it out entirely. As ironically enough, some people commented that their comfort games were Devil May Cry 5 and Doom. Yeah, this is just so comfortable, just so relaxing. I could basically fall asleep right now. These games take the inherently satisfying gameplay to a whole different level, and just make every part of the game engaging and fast-paced. And so instead of low-effort satisfaction, these games focus on moment-to-moment catharsis. Their gameplay is better than any other at relieving stress. Yes, Doom is a very dark and grim game filled with gore, and yes, Devil May Cry 5 has some of the most insanely complex combat systems I've ever seen, but both of those games are pure power fantasies. You're not trapped in a level with demons, they're trapped in there with you. And the feeling of ripping devils in half or landing a 100-hit combo will almost always get you to forget everything else about your day. Someone cut you off in traffic? Take it out on the armies of hell. Your boss yelled at you? Commit genocide on waves of monsters. Or just jam out to some of the hardest soundtracks ever written. There is a lot to say about the ability of a game to feel cathartic, but really it just boils down to how good it is at lighting up those reward centers in your brain. Going on a rampage in GTA or slicing a dude into a million pieces in Metal Gear Rising, really it's just pure dopamine. I want to feel nothing but pure blood-pumping adrenaline as I zip around a map at 150 miles an hour and kill God himself in a sword fight. I want to feel like the most powerful being on Earth. Which, rather paradoxically, is what makes all these incredible comfort games. Because comfort isn't just cuddling up on the couch playing the cozy farm game. Sometimes it's just taking out your frustration. It's feeling better about yourself by making an in-game character feel much worse. I mean, real life is stressful enough. A good game should be able to take your mind off it. The best part of the medium of gaming is that it can make you feel emotions that are real while doing something that isn't. And any game that can do that with every aspect of its gameplay is an S-tier comfort game. So hopefully that can explain the gameplay aspect of comfort games pretty well. Whether you're jamming out to metal music while virtually violating the Geneva Convention, or just listening to a podcast while planting some crops, it's a game that can be satisfying to play over and over again. But what about the games where you don't want to listen to anything else while playing? Because the next factor of a good comfort game is familiarity of setting, characters, and plot. Basically everything other than the gameplay. If the vibes are immaculate, then you have a pretty good comfort game on your hands. After all, I've talked about how games should take your mind off things, but many times they'll do this with elements other than just gameplay. A good comfort game should try to immerse you in its world. It should provide a sense of escapism. Now, the best way it can do this is through likable characters and setting. Personally for me, the Mass Effect series is a huge comfort series for this very reason. I can just feel like I'm in the game. I know all the characters, the whole setting just wraps me up in a blanket of action and adventure, and I can walk around the Normandy like I'm going to visit my friends. I can totally forget about what I have going on and just focus on this fictional world that I'm in. I mean, there's socio-political issues, space racism, and mass genocide in the world of Mass Effect, but hey, that's a lot better than morning traffic, am I right? And like Mass Effect, tons of RPGs can become people's comfort games because they can get you invested in the world. I've never played any of the Persona games, but even I know that a huge aspect of it is just hanging out at school with your friends. And that's a huge part as to why they're so beloved. Or outside of RPGs, there are tons of adventure games that sell you on their characters and tone. I could have a gun to my head and be scared for my life, but if I heard the Uncharted theme kick in, it would probably still make me feel better. The feeling I get playing an Uncharted game is quite indescribable actually, because it's all the positive feelings of watching a fun adventure movie, but interacting with this world and getting to know the characters over a longer period of time makes it that much stronger. The games don't even have great gameplay, if I'm being honest, but for the sheer enjoyment of the world and characters, I replay them all the time. And I should say, it doesn't take that much to build comfort outside of gameplay. You don't have to make a 20-hour-long Indiana Jones knockoff just to be comfortable. Even just a killer soundtrack can get you to feel better. Music is an incredibly important part of gameplay because, like any other medium, it can set the mood more efficiently than any other element. Don't believe me? Well, here's what one of my videos sounds like without background music. Yeah, Suddenly it's not a comfy video essay, it's just a guy shouting at a camera in his living room. And now the fourth factor isn't really a critical piece to comfort games, but more often than not it shows up, especially with people's favorites. And that factor is nostalgia. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. A game being your first of a certain kind or having a strong memory attached to it can really cement it in your memory. And comfort games, being ones you come back to again and again, means that games you're nostalgic for have a very high chance of being your top pick. Nintendo games are far and away the most popular example of this. Really, all of them are very nostalgic to most people. Games like Super Mario 64 all the way up to Breath of the Wild really just have a certain quality to them that makes them very memorable. And Pokemon is pretty much an entire franchise built on hooking you when you're 10 and then keeping you attached until you're 35 and remember type advantages better than your partner's birthday. Or you've got the games that trigger specific memories for you when you play them. For me, Mass Effect 2 specifically brings me back to a long weekend in high school where I went down to the basement on Friday afternoon, booted up the game, and did not stop playing it until Monday morning. I legitimately beat Mass Effect 2 in one nearly 50-hour-long sitting, alone in the basement, subsisting off of gummy bears and Mountain Dew. I only went back upstairs once I was finished to make myself a peanut butter sandwich, which I immediately threw up and then passed out on the bathroom floor from lack of sleep. So for as long as I live, I will have the entirety of Mass Effect 2 burned into my brain because of that memory, as well as a general disgust for peanut butter. And the stories that make a game nostalgic don't even have to be about the game at all. Like this person who commented that they love Persona 5 because it takes place in Shinjuku, a real place that they lived in and are nostalgic for. It's just these attached memories that we keep in our mind that make a comfort game special. And so that, I think, best describes what a comfort game is. A game that's easy to pick up and replay, feels satisfying to do what you want in, lets you escape the real world, and most likely has some nostalgia tied to it. However, I want to make it clear that all of these factors aren't the definitive structure that a comfort game has to conform to. The truth is, any game can be a comfort game for you, it just has to be a game you can find comfort in. Some people want to chill out playing Stardew Valley, some people want to inflict horrible violence and doom, some people just want to click on Excel spreadsheets and end up playing RimWorld instead. You can really find joy and comfort in anything, and with this many games out now, it's just up to you to find one. And now normally I would end one of these videos by talking about how important the type of game I'm covering is, or why you should care about all the games I've talked about. But I think with comfort games in particular, it's the opposite. These games aren't important. They often don't have greater purpose or meaning in our lives, and we really don't have complex reasons for playing them. What is so important about comfort games is that they are so basic. The reason we have to play them is so singular. They achieve the most primal desire we have to play a video game. They're fun. That's it. That's the entirety of the discussion of comfort games. They're fun to play, and people enjoy going back and playing them because of that. I can list factors and psychological reasons and try and come up with a deeper meaning behind all of it, but at the end of the day, I'm describing in whole paragraphs what only needs a 3-letter word. And now to talk a little bit about why that might matter, there's a pretty infamous quote by Neil Druckmann about The Last of Us 2 that I want to cover. I still remember it getting shared online, especially on Twitter, with the headline saying, "The Last of Us 2 is not meant to be fun," says Neil Druckmann, which sounds like an incredibly pretentious thing to say. I know lots of people that shit on him and Naughty Dog for this article that got spread around. What's funny is this isn't even his quote, it's just clickbait. When you open up the article and go to the interview it links, the real quote is way different. It actually reads, "For us with The Last of Us specifically, we don't use the word fun. We say engaging. And it might seem like a minor distinction, but it's an important one for us, which is we believe that if we're invested in the character and the relationships they're in and their goal, then we're going to go along on their journey with them and maybe even commit acts that make us uncomfortable." And now that quote is significantly less pretentious and makes a hell of a lot more sense than the hit piece that got shared on Twitter, which, to be fair, I still think Neil Druckmann is overly pretentious, but what he says here is completely right. The Last of Us 2 isn't fun most of the time. That game is incredibly dark and serious. It's a story about hatred and revenge and all of these horrible emotions that expresses that through some of the most gruesome and realistic violence I've ever seen in a video game. which is fine. I have no problem with a game that isn't fun. I think games are like any other piece of media and can make you feel whatever they want. There's an argument to be made on how well The Last of Us 2 achieves its goal of making you feel bad, but I think its pursuit of that goal is fine nonetheless. However, the important part of that quote is him saying, "We don't use the word fun, we say engaging," because I think he unknowingly touched on a worrying trend across modern gaming. Games now are not being made to be fun anymore. At least across a lot of AAA games, and obviously I'm hyperbolizing, a lot of games are still meant to be fun, but just hear me out. If you compare Uncharted 2 to The Last of Us 2, Uncharted is clearly made to be fun. No part of that game is meant to be taken all that seriously. The game's stance on violence even just boils down to, it's okay to kill 70,000 guys with a machine gun as long as they're the bad guys. The Last of Us 2, however, is engaging. It's trying to be thoughtful and serious, which might make it sweep an award show and emotionally affect the people who play it, but it also makes it much more tiring to play. Not only because it's longer, but because of how much of your emotional battery it drains, how much of your attention it demands. Back to Uncharted 2, and that game doesn't feel tiring to me at all. It may not have as much deeper meaning or explorations of humanity, but I can actually recharge my mental batteries by playing it. It's something I can enjoy and use to feel better. But lots more games now are taking the stance of The Last of Us 2. Even outside of Naughty Dog, just look at the new God of War. That's one of my favorite games that Sony has ever put out, and it's much more focused on this slow, serious story and methodical gameplay than any other game in the series. Again, this man is basically a superhero and walks like he has gout. I do not want to replay this game when I know it's going to be 10 hours of staring at the back of his bald head before the gameplay picks up. Video games now are maturing at an alarming rate. Not only are they getting longer and longer, but also more serious and dramatic and intense. Which is amazing for the most part. I love games that can have movie quality stories or stunning visuals, but they also require so much more from the player. So to bring it back around to comfort games, fun is actually the main reason they're important. Because the most common answer someone will give to why a comfort game is a comfort game is that it's just fun. And I think fewer and fewer games are embracing that philosophy in their game design. They're making more and more engaging games, but less and less fun games. Less games that you can pick up and start enjoying right away. Less games that I want to replay over and over again, and less games where I don't have to stress about them while playing. So to wrap up, here's another quote for you. This time from someone with a whole different perspective, from someone like Neil Druckmann.
The game is fun. The game is a battle. If it's not fun, why bother? If it's not a battle, where's the fun? It's a journey, a passport to new worlds. Yes, the journey requires the right ticket. And that ticket is Nintendo Switch.
All right, that's enough. We get it. Thank you. Something I found as I get older, all the way up to my ripe old age of 23, is that I've started dropping games much more often, because the game expects so much of me that I do not have the time or patience or emotional capacity for. But you know what I almost always do immediately after dropping a game? I boot up Mass Effect 2. I start a new build in Bloodborne, or I make a new world in Minecraft. I go back to my comfort games. And I think that explains it better than anything else I could say. Comfort games are important because they're stress-free. You can play them when you're in a bad mood or feeling tired, which is increasingly necessary when lots of big games start to feel like work. And this applies even outside of gaming. I will struggle to sit down and watch an entire episode of some new prestige television show, but I'll happily watch an entire 12-hour video on Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Partly because I have crippling ADHD, which might actually explain a lot of what I've said in this video, but partly because it requires way less of me to engage with. I imagine quite a few people watching this video right now have me on in the background or on a second monitor, or you were just going to eat some food and put me on to watch while you did it. And it's harder to do that with some emotional new Netflix drama, just like it's harder to get into a new AAA story game. So comfort games for me are like YouTube videos from your favorite creator. They might not be as stimulating as some more profound piece of media, but they're so much more necessary in order to relax and unwind, and most importantly, be comfortable. Thank you for 10,000 subscribers, and thank you for watching. But hey, don't forget that for just $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits like these cool people. You also get a wacky little badge next to your name, as well as access to behind-the-scenes editing timelines where I talk about how I made the video you just watched. I did just update the member tiers, so now there's only 3. They all give you the same thing, it just depends how much you want to support the channel. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time. Factor 1. Familiar gameplay. Am I fucking Mr. Plinkett? What the fuck?